Hey, welcome back to Linode. Once again, my name is Austin Gill, and we are working on a series building full-stack applications with Remix, Prisma, and SQL databases. I hope that you've been enjoying the series so far. If this is your first time coming in, I would encourage you to check out the previous videos where we actually set up the project and started working through some of our CRUD operations. That's create, read, update, and delete. In this video, we are going to be focusing on the last operation, delete. But that's not the only thing we're going to be doing. We are also going to be looking at ways to improve the current state of the application using a pattern called optimistic UI. And we'll be tapping into a Remix feature called transitions in order to do that. Now, if some of that stuff doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. We're going to be covering it in the video. So let's get started. So now we basically covered creating entries, reading entries, and updating entries. The only thing we have to cover next is deleting entries. But before we jump onto that, I want to look at another thing that's kind of cool about Remix. If I come into this action and I add some synthetic delay, so this is happening pretty quickly because we're on my local machine. But if I do something like await new promise, and we say grab the resolved function, and we say we have a set timeout, and we pass it the resolver, and we say let's wait 500 milliseconds anytime that we do this action. What's going to happen is when I hit nugget and I change it to nuggety and I save it, there's like a pretty good delay where I don't really know whether that save button actually did anything, right? I click it, let's go back. So I click it and then I'm waiting, and then all of a sudden I get some feedback that it was successful. Now, 500 milliseconds is actually not a very long delay. It could actually be even longer for users. So we want to give a good experience to users to let them know that yes, your request went through, we're just waiting on it. So for that, Remix has this concept of transitions, and it's basically a transition between states of the application. So anytime you navigate between pages or anytime you send a form and a post request, there's a transition happening in the data sort of on the server that the client side needs to also reflect. So we can access those transitions in our code by using another hook. We can say use transition from the Remix React library. And in our component, we can actually say const transition is going to equal use transition. Now let's see what this transition says. Transition. If we look in the console, we can see that we have an object with locations undefined, state of idle, submission undefined, type of idle. Okay, not particularly interesting. But once we hit save, we'll see interesting things happen. We'll see 4 more transitions updates. The first one happens before the transition or before the form submission was sent. The second one, we can see something more interesting where we get the state went from idle to submitting. So that's essentially as the form is being submitted, we can see the location that the form was submitted to, and we can see the form data that was sent. Next, we see a loading state. So that's as it's waiting for that submission to kind of return, we can still see the form data and the state is loading and the action is reloading. And then we finally go back to an idle state that sort of looks like the original state. So with that information, we can actually do some pretty interesting things. One, why not update the page title right away instead of waiting for that submission to return? This is a concept called optimistic UI. So we can say, hey, if the, if the transition dot submission is defined, right? So we have this submission information. In the idle state, it will not be defined, but if we're submitting some data and it is defined, we can say, we can set the title to the transition.submission and get the form data dot get, and we can get the name off of that submission. If it's not submitting, then we can default to the pet.name. It's kind of ugly, but you'll see. Hopefully you can understand what that means. So this is a really cool pattern because the user doesn't have to wait for that data to return. We can update this and then hit save, and right away we see the title update, even though the data has not actually submitted or finished submitting. So they get a little bit of cool optimistic UI, considering that, assuming that this is going to go fine, and they think that their data is good. And as long as it's good, we're all right. If they were to submit some bad data, they would get that 400, and they could come back and look at Nugget's data and see that it's not actually updated. So that's all good. Now we can make it a step further by saying, instead of just save pet, we can say saving pet to let them know that, hey, there's still some time that's taking for this to come back. So we can say, if the transition dot state does not equal idle, then we can say saving. Otherwise, we can say save, and we can close that off, pet. So it's either going to say saving pet or save pet. So now we can say, if we want to change it to nuggety and we hit save, cool, it's saving the pet, and then it saved the pet. Or maybe I'm going to do something like saving, otherwise it's save pet. Awesome. So we're going to change that back to nugget, hit save, it's saving, and we're done. So that's a couple little user experience improvements that we've done on top of doing updates. We could also do the same on the create page if we wanted to. Okay, we're ready to move on to the final CRUD operation, delete. If we want to delete a pet, I think it makes sense to have a delete button on the pet's individual page. But actually, to be more specific, we're going to do something a little bit more than just a button. So we'll open up the pets page again, and we'll come down. I'm going to put it somewhere down below this form. And just to make sure that we have some nice gap in between, I'm going to give this form some margin bottom 8. So now we could do something like a button that says delete. And see what this looks like. Yeah, that's kind of good. But I want to make sure that we have some protection in case someone accidentally clicks delete. We have some sort of confirmation that says, are you sure? So I actually have another component, and I just realized this transition is being logged there. Okay, cool. So I actually have a component that we can use called a dialog. And the dialog component looks something like this. I'm going to replace the button. I'm going to take this delete, and we have to give the dialog an ID. So I'm going to call it delete modal, and I'm going to also give it a toggle, which is the word to use. So let's see what that does, and let's put some content in here. Dialog content. Cool. So now if we click this delete, we can see the dialog opens up. We can also click to exit it. Tab, tab, tab. Awesome. Exit. Looks good. We can also hit the escape key to get out, or we can click on the background. And I just realized I also have an extra console log in there. Whoops. Let's get rid of that. Oops. Save that. Okay. So we want to have some text that says, are you sure you want to delete this pet? And then we want to have a button that says something like some sort of confirmation. Now, if we use the button component, we certainly can say yes or something like that. And we could have some event listener that says when this is clicked, submit some fetch request. Now, I personally like to think that if we've gotten this far building an application with Remix, focusing on progressive enhancement that all works without JavaScript required, then we should continue to build things that way. So if we need to make another HTTP request, we actually don't need to use a button with a fetch event listener. We've already been using some HTTP tools. We can use a form. Now, does that mean we have to fill out the form with something? Yes and no. Because we actually don't need to send any data. We can just submit the form without any data. We can have a button with a type equal to submit. And then we can say, sure you want to delete this data? Yes, delete this pet. And then we can close that button. And now we just have to submit this form, but we are currently dealing with an issue. So one, we're doing a mutation here, right? So we're going to want to set this form method equal to a post, but this introduces an interesting dilemma, because if we have two forms on the page, neither of which, well, any form on the page by default is going to submit to the current page it's on. So if I hit this and I hit this button, this is actually kind of not exactly a button, it's a form. But if I click that, it's actually going to submit to this page, and it's going to hit that bad request because this page is, let's see, reload that page. This page is expecting this data to be sent. So what can we do about this? Well, who says we have to submit the form to the same page? We can actually create a new route, sort of an API route, that handles the delete request for this pet. So I'm actually going to do that by defining an action here. I'm going to create an action, and I'm going to assign that action to the string, basically this URL, pet slash, and then we'll put the pet.id, which we get from the loader, and then we can add a new route at /delete. So now when we click this button, it's going to submit a form request to the delete route. Now this delete route doesn't currently exist, which means we need to create a route to handle this. So inside of our routes, we are going to go to /pet/petid. So if we want, we would have to create a folder at $petid, and inside of that we could put a file called delete.jsx. But Remix actually has another trick up its sleeve where you can use a dot delimiter to represent folder structure. So I can say petid/delete. So now these are kind of similar things. Let's cancel that. Should be in there. There you go. And I'm going to clear this out. And in fact, because this is not going to be a template, it's just going to receive post requests. It doesn't even have to be a JSX file. It can just be a JS file. So because we're not going to have a template at this route, we actually are only going to need that action. So we can export an async function called action. And let's just prove that this is even working. Console log delete. Okay. So we're going to open up our request. We're going to say, yes, we want to delete this. And then I define an action for this route that didn't return anything. Yep, I made that comment before. We have to return something. Little kind of annoying bug, but that's okay. Let's reload. It's going to ask us if we want to delete. We're going to say, yes, delete. And then don't worry about the error. We just need to see that we actually executed our code here. Now that's fine. We're going to get this error because Remix is going to try and do a GET request. After all, when we submit this form, it's actually going to try and navigate to this page. So it's going to send that post request, and then it's going to try and load the delete route. But if we've already deleted our pet, we don't actually need this route to load anything. So instead, what we're going to do is redirect. So we're going to import the let's see, should be the easier way, redirect. There we go. And we're going to return redirect, and we can just go right back to the home page. After all, we're deleting an entry. So where are we going to send them? So let's go back. Let's go to the pet. Let's try deleting it. Let's delete this pet. It's going to redirect us back to the home page after calling our action here that executes our delete function. So now we actually just need to provide that functionality. So back in our code, instead of logging delete, what we're going to do is write some SQL that's going to more or less look like this. Delete from our pet table, and then we need to pass a where clause where the ID equals the ID. Now we've done something that looks like this before as well. So we can grab the ID from the route params, right? We can say const ID equals params dot pet ID. That's once again going to be coming from the params here, the file name. And once we have that ID, we need to actually execute the SQL, which we're going to need Prisma for. So import our database or Prisma client from // and we're going to say services index.js. And I am going to await the database dot pet table dot delete, and delete takes an object where we can pass another where clause, very similar to the other queries that we've written, and it's going to ask for an ID, and we're going to say we have that already, so we're going to delete the entry where the ID matches the params pet ID. This actually should have been up there. Once that is complete, then we can redirect back to the home page. So here we go. Nugget, you've been a good dog, but I don't know if I want to keep you around. So we're going to delete. We're going to add some spacing there because that I forgot to do. So let's go to the pet ID. Let me say, yeah, you need class name, some padding or some margin bottom. Let's do 4. That should be all right. There we go. You sure you want to delete this pet? Yes, delete the pet. It's deleting, and there you go. There's no pets. We're on the home page. We deleted that pet. We can go back to the previous page if we want to, but it's not found. And we actually have an application error there. That's a simple one to fix, actually. Good thing we tested that because we need to make sure that the pet is available. So we can just say if there is not a pet, then we need to throw a new response error, 404. There we go. Got to account for those errors. And there we go. We get a 404. So we can go back to the home page. Oops, too far. And there's nothing to see here. Okay, so let's run through that one more time really quick. We've got the button to create a new pet. We're going to create Nugget again, type as a dog, and we're going to add that pet. That pet is now going to be on the home page, which we can navigate to and check it out. And we can see we can modify this data. We're going to say Nuggy butt, and we'll submit that data. Optimistic UI updates that, and when it comes back, we see that during the loading state, we see that we have some saving information, talking to the user, saying that we're in the middle of saving. So, and if we want to delete, we have this UI that we can reach for, get the confirmation, yes, delete this pet, and that's going to delete it and send us back to the home page. How wonderful is that? We just went through creating, reading, updating, and deleting entries all in Remix with a nice UI, all with progressive enhancement, so it'll work with or without JavaScript, or if JavaScript fails. And we've got Prisma writing all of the SQL for us in a nice, well-typed, convenient approach that is also safe from SQL injections. All right, we have just made the world's cruddiest application. And by cruddiest, I mean that it supports create, read, update, and delete operations. So good for you for sticking it through. We're not quite finished though. We do have to actually get our application deployed. Otherwise, it's just gonna sit on our local machine and not really do much. So we're gonna do that in the next video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you know when that video is coming out. And of course, if you have not yet, hit the link in the description to sign up for a new Linode account that's going to get you $100 in credit, which we are going to be using when we actually deploy our application. So any comments, questions, or concerns, as usual, throw them in the chat. Find me on Twitter. Happy to connect with you. And if you are enjoying this series, a big old like button is going to make me really happy and show me that you're enjoying it.